October 17, 1943. Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. The wind carried the tang of gasoline and iron across the cracked runway as Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima adjusted his leather gloves and lit a cigarette. Around him, the jungle breathed heat. Sweat trickled down his back beneath the flight suit. But his eyes stayed locked on the photograph in the mechanic's hand. It was grainy, black and white. A new American fighter, thick fuselage, blunt nose, high wing load. Nakajima exhaled a curl of smoke and grinned. "This is what they send now?" The mechanic nodded, unsure. He chuckled, short, dismissive. "It looks like a school bus with wings." Behind him, sunlight gleamed off the delicate frame of a Mitsubishi Zero, being wheeled out for a sortie. Light, graceful, lethal. Nakajima crushed the cigarette under his boot. "Let them come," he said, glancing skyward. "Their machines are built by housewives, ours by warriors." He didn't know it yet, but that school bus was already in the air, and in exactly 3 weeks, it would put a bullet through his engine in less than 3 seconds. The Zero had ruled the Pacific sky for nearly 3 years. Its wings carved clouds like a sword through silk, nimble, responsive, deadly in a turn. By late 1943, the legend of the Japanese naval airman had reached near mythic status. Rabaul, perched on the edge of New Britain, had become the Empire's last major stronghold in the South Pacific. From here, waves of Zeros launched daily to harass Allied positions over Bougainville and the Solomon Chain. Inside the officer's briefing tent, Lieutenant Commander Nakajima leaned over a table scattered with hand-drawn maps. Red arrows swept outward from Rabaul like claws. Bougainville, Empress Augusta Bay, even the northern flanks of Guadalcanal, all within reach. A younger pilot, Ensign Saito, adjusted his helmet beside him. Barely 20, eyes full of fire. "They say the Americans are getting better," he muttered. Nakajima smiled. "Let them." He tapped a finger on the map. "It doesn't matter how many they send. We shoot better. We climb faster. We fight like ghosts." He meant it. The Zero had earned its fearsome reputation through agility and precision. It lacked armor, yes, but armor was for cowards. Real pilots didn't get hit. More importantly, Japan still believed in the old code. One ace could change a battle. And they had many. At least, they thought they did. Outside, the airfield throbbed with life. Fuel drums clanked. Maintenance crews in oil-stained overalls prepped aircraft using whatever parts hadn't rusted from sea salt. Every crate had come over thousands of miles. Every bullet was precious. Nakajima didn't worry. The war had changed, yes, but the sky still belonged to men like him. Men who could outfly their enemies, even when outnumbered. He remembered Coral Sea, Midway, how the Americans had scattered, confused and slow. Their planes, the Wildcat, the Dauntless, were sluggish, brute machines. Easy prey. Nothing's changed, he told himself. But things had changed. The Americans weren't retreating anymore. Their ships, instead of turning back, were coming closer. Their airstrikes no longer tested. They punished. And then came something new. That thick, boxy silhouette. That unfamiliar growl of a twin-stage radial engine. That blue shape diving from the sun at impossible angles. And the moment it fired, everything changed. Nakajima didn't know it yet, but the old world, the world of glory and dogfights, was slipping away. The Empire was still fighting with elegance. America had begun fighting with industry. 3 days later, the whispers began. A patrol returning from Bougainville arrived one plane short. Its leader, Lieutenant Fujiwara, staggered out of his Zero, his hands still trembling as he pulled off his oxygen mask. Blood caked his cheek, a thin line from shrapnel, but his voice shook harder than his wound. "It came out of nowhere," he muttered. "Blue, high wing." It didn't turn. It climbed, straight up. Nakajima was there. He tilted his head. "You let a wildcat do that?" Fujiwara met his gaze. It wasn't a wildcat. The others laughed, a rough, tired laugh that soldiers use to bury fear. But later that night, in the maintenance shed, the laughter faded. A Zero's fuselage lay open like a gutted fish. Bullet holes dotted its underside, clean, spaced perfectly, like they were measured with a ruler. The mechanic whistled low. 6 holes, same caliber, all in a line. Another voice, quiet. 50 caliber, maybe Browning, close range. Nakajima stared at the holes. They weren't random, they were surgical. Over the next week, more rumors spread. A squadron over the Shortland Islands was bounced by fast, unfamiliar planes. Pilots spoke of strange silhouettes, dive angles that made no aerodynamic sense. Nakajima reviewed the reports. Descriptions varied. Some called it a wildcat with fat wings. Others said it was something entirely new. He traced one paragraph with his finger, climbed vertically, rolled into a dive. No hesitation. Fired 6 guns in perfect convergence. Our planes could not keep up. He grunted. Propaganda. Still, something sat wrong in his chest. The Empire had survived by controlling the air, but air was beginning to feel less like freedom and more like a trap. Then one morning, Nakajima stood outside the hangar, watching a Zero taxi out. The mechanic beside him handed over a folder. Inside, a grainy photo, likely from American reconnaissance. Nakajima squinted. That same silhouette. Blunt nose, oversized canopy, thick tail. He stared at it longer than he meant to. And for the first time in months, he didn't feel like laughing. November 5th, 1943. Rabaul woke to the low rumble of engines. By dawn, black dots speckled the sky over Simpson Harbor. Hellcats, dozens. Launched from carriers off the coast, USS Saratoga and USS Princeton. Part of a strike force the Japanese didn't believe could reach this far, this fast. Alarms blared. Pilots ran. Nakajima didn't speak, just climbed into the cockpit. As his Zero roared down the runway, the air felt heavier. Not from weather, from something else. He broke through the clouds, and there they were. Dark blue, broad wings, silver flashes as sunlight caught gun barrels. They didn't circle. They dove, and they didn't come alone. Behind them, Avengers, Dauntlesses, bombers flanked by fighters, layers of American steel in perfect formation. Nakajima kicked right. His wingmen fanned out. He spotted one Hellcat diving toward an Aichi D3A Val. He chased, pulling into the sun. Textbook Zero tactics. But the Hellcat saw him, pulled up, climbed, straight. Nakajima followed, his engine strained. The climb was too steep. He lost speed. And then, tracers. A half-second burst from behind. A second Hellcat. It had waited, ambushed him on the vertical. He rolled, dove, pulled 5 Gs. The Zero groaned. Metal creaked. He barely escaped. Wind howling past a fractured canopy. Below him, a trail of smoke. His wingman gone. In 7 minutes, they lost 4 aircraft. Back on the ground, his boots crunched over broken glass as he walked the runway, helmet in hand. The air reeked of oil and burnt rubber. Flames flickered in the distance. A storage tank hit. He didn't speak. One technician handed him a spent shell casing. "50 caliber," he said. "American. Found it lodged in a wing root." Nakajima stared at it. Wide, smooth, perfectly machined. This wasn't brute strength. This was precision. That night, sitting under the humming lights of the command tent, he wrote 3 words in his flight log. Not a wildcat. And for the first time, he wondered if the Empire's sky was slipping through his fingers. The morning after the raid, the hangars were quieter. Even the roosters that usually crowed behind the jungle thickets seemed unsure. Nakajima stood beside a Zero whose tail had been sawn off mid-flight. The rear stabilizer was gone, shredded clean. The mechanic ran a finger along the exposed metal. "Hit from behind and from above," he muttered. Whoever did this was waiting. Nakajima didn't reply. His eyes fell to the line of returning aircraft, what was left of them. One canopy was dark with blood. Another glinted with bullet holes. One didn't return at all. Inside the operations tent, intelligence officers whispered. One brought forward a piece of captured film, taken from a downed American Hellcat. Someone had recovered the gun camera reel. Nakajima leaned in. Frames flickered. A Zero, beautiful, curved, gliding in a wide arc. Then the crosshairs. 6 streams of fire erupted from the Hellcat. Not a wild burst, a measured spray, surgically timed. The Zero jerked once and disappeared in a cloud of flame. Silence in the tent. Nakajima's throat tightened. He had seen planes die. He had seen men vanish. But never like this. Not so fast. Not so clean. Later, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, he returned to his bunk and laid out every aircraft report from the past 5 days. Each one said the same thing: unfamiliar design, vertical climbs, dive speeds that bent logic. Guns placed not for quantity, but for symmetry. 6 50 caliber Brownings, all forward-facing, all synchronized. The name appeared again and again, F6F Hellcat. One report said it had thicker armor than any American fighter to date, that it could absorb hits and still fly home. Another said it could match the Zero's climb and beat it in a dive. Nakajima's fingers trembled as he flipped the pages. This wasn't just a new plane. It was a different kind of war. He looked out toward the runway, now lit by oil lamps and streaked with fuel stains, and whispered, barely loud enough for himself to hear, "We are not ready." The map was American, laminated, waterproof, and terrifying. Nakajima held it under a desk lamp in the intelligence tent, the edges still damp from the sea. A patrol had recovered it from a lifeboat after shooting down a torpedo bomber near the coast. It wasn't a battle map. It was a fuel logistics overlay. Lines stretched like arteries from Hawaii to Ulithi, from Ulithi to the Solomon Islands, from there radiating into every corner of the South Pacific. Refueling ships, submarine supply depots, floating dry docks. Nakajima's eyes narrowed at one label. USS Neosho class tanker. Capacity, 28,000 barrels. That was more fuel than his entire airfield could store. And the range circle of the Hellcat, drawn in confident red, reached past Rabaul, farther than he thought possible. Impossible, he muttered. No carrier aircraft can fly that far. But there it was, in print, backed by precision. He turned to the intelligence officer. "Where are they based?" "Carrier Task Group 38.2, sir," the man replied. "They're not static. They move daily." Nakajima froze. That meant the enemy could strike, vanish, and return from a different vector, all while launching dozens of planes. Another folder arrived. A newspaper, not a Japanese one. This was Stars and Stripes, taken off a downed American pilot. Nakajima read the article aloud, his voice slow, as if trying to prove it wrong. Lieutenant Butch Voris flew 5 combat sorties in a single day aboard the USS Essex. 3 confirmed kills, refueled twice, ate dinner on time. He looked up. 5 sorties. In one day. His own squadron could barely fuel up twice before sundown. Later that night, standing alone beside a grounded Zero, Nakajima noticed its rear wheel had cracked. There was no replacement, no shipment coming, no way to move the plane. He knelt beside the strut and touched the rubber, brittle, sun-worn. A memory flashed, a training session from 1941. A young Nakajima had told a mechanic, "If I fly right, the plane will never be touched." He smiled at that now, a tired, bitter smile. The Hellcats didn't care how well you flew. They were faster, heavier, and endless. And now, they were everywhere. November 11th, 1943. The second major strike on Rabaul. This time, it wasn't a raid. It was an execution. Nakajima launched into the sky with only 2 wingmen. What met them was a wall of aircraft, blue steel in tight formation, layered in depth and altitude. Hellcats led the charge, weaving in and out of torpedo bombers and dive bombers with mechanical rhythm. The sky wasn't a battlefield. It was a machine. He banked left to evade a diving fighter. Another was already there. Gunfire, flashes. A jolt rocked his plane. He lost oil pressure. His controls stiffened. Behind him, Ensign Saito, the boy from a week ago, was locked in a spiral, a Hellcat on his tail, cannons blazing in short, disciplined bursts. Not panicked, not angry, just inevitable. Saito's plane exploded before it hit the sea. Nakajima couldn't turn back. He dove, low and fast, smoke trailing, engine choking. Somehow he limped home, but part of him didn't return. Inside the command bunker, the mood was raw. A squadron leader slammed his flight log on the table. They knew our angles, our climb rates, even our patrol times. One officer whispered, "They've cracked our codes." Another said nothing, just stared at a photo. 12 Hellcats lined up on a flight deck, their canopies open. Young American faces, confident, relaxed. They looked nothing like warriors. That's what made them terrifying. Nakajima walked the perimeter of the airfield after dusk. Fires still burned on the far edge. A Zero lay in pieces near the mess hall, its wings stripped, its tail gone. He paused at a crate of spare parts. Inside, 1 propeller, a cracked canopy, 3 mismatched bolts. Someone had labeled the box Hope. He turned and left. That night in his quarters, he opened his journal. "We thought we had time. We believed in spirit, in training, in the blade. But they came with factories, and the sky is full of them now. This is not war. This is drowning." The page shook in his hand as he closed it. Outside, the rumble of engines echoed again. But it wasn't Japanese. It was another wave, already inbound. By mid-November, Rabaul no longer controlled the air. It was merely surviving beneath it. Nakajima stood before a makeshift chalkboard in the intelligence hut. An officer was drawing boxes, each marked with a strange abbreviation. F6F, TBM, CVL, AO. Supply codes, logistics patterns. They weren't maps of battles. They were maps of flow. One diagram showed how a Hellcat's engine, a Pratt & Whitney R2800, was assembled in Connecticut, shipped to California, then loaded onto Essex-class carriers bound for the Pacific. The wings came from Buffalo. The fuel systems from Michigan. Every bolt, every part, perfectly standardized. Nakajima whispered, "This is modular." A junior officer nodded. "Every American carrier carries spares. They don't repair, they replace." Nakajima blinked. Back at his hangar, 1-0 had been down for 9 days, waiting for a single carburetor. He walked past the infirmary. A wounded pilot lay on a cot, face bandaged, eyes shut. Shrapnel from an exploding Hellcat. But the American had still landed safely before dying of blood loss. The Japanese pilot in the bed beside him murmured, "He saved his plane. We can't even save ourselves." Nakajima didn't answer. He spent the evening flipping through more captured documents. A report from Grumman stated, "Design philosophy, durability over finesse, prioritize mass production, replaceable parts, pilot survivability, ease of maintenance on deck." It hit him. The Hellcat was never meant to win a dogfight. It was meant to win the war. A mechanic brought him a melted bearing. From the Zero that crashed yesterday. Nakajima turned it in his hand. Burned, soft, warped by heat. He imagined a Hellcat crew doing the same, then swapping it out in 5 minutes, with a part that fit perfectly. He looked up. The airfield still held shape, but the system behind it, the veins and arteries of war, was collapsing. And America's? America's was just getting warmed up. A new file arrived from headquarters. Inside, hand-translated pages of American technical manuals, engineering blueprints for the Hellcat. Nakajima studied them under a dim bulb, fingers tracing the thick lines of the airframe. Every joint labeled, every screw standardized. But what stopped him cold wasn't the design, it was the notes in the margins. Don't chase perfection, build it fast, build it strong, get it back in the air. That wasn't Japanese doctrine. In Japan, machines were handcrafted, pilots were artisans. Perfection was sacred. But the Americans, they built for replacement, not reverence. Nakajima flipped to a memo from the Grumman factory floor. One line circled in pencil. "A Hellcat lost is a lesson. The next one will be better." He leaned back in his chair, stunned. In the Empire, loss brought shame. Here, it brought evolution. Outside, a corporal handed him a tattered Stars and Stripes clipping. A photo of young women assembling Hellcat fuselages in New York. Smiling, sleeves rolled. Nakajima's mouth was dry. They looked like schoolgirls. And yet, they were building machines that were burying his comrades. He turned the page. Another article. A Hellcat pilot named Ensign George Bush had been shot down near Chichijima and rescued within hours by a submarine, guided by scout planes and precise coordinates. An entire network built to protect one man. Nakajima looked down at his own boots. If he were shot down tomorrow, he wouldn't even have a life raft. That night, thunder cracked above Rabaul. Rain streaked the tin roofs and turned the runway to mud. Inside the barracks, a young pilot asked, "Commander, if they lose 100 planes, do they care?" Nakajima didn't answer at first. He just stared into the dark, the sound of rain filling the silence. Then softly, "No, because they'll build 100 more. And each one better than the last." The figures came quietly, folded inside a coded transmission from Naval Intelligence, intercepted American production reports, cross-verified by Tokyo. Nakajima stood beside a flickering lantern, holding the paper like it might burn through his hands. 12,975 Hellcats. That was the number. He read it again. 12,275. He scanned further. In less than 2 years, The U.S. had manufactured that many F6F fighters, shipped, fueled, flown, each one with 6 Browning machine guns, each one with enough range to cover half the Pacific, each one built for just one purpose: to hunt and survive. He looked at the next line: 5,163 confirmed kills. Combat loss ratio, 19-1. He thought of the men who died beside him: Fujiwara, Saito, Kondo. All of them trained for years. All of them gone in seconds. And the American pilots? Replaced, reassigned, reinforced. There was no romance in it, just math. A separate sheet listed aircraft production per month. Grumman, 600 Hellcats in March. Vought, 400 Corsairs in April. North American, 700 Mustangs in May. Nakajima shook his head. It wasn't a war machine. It was a continent moving in rhythm. He turned the page again. Photos clipped from a downed pilot satchel. Carrier flight decks. Crews drinking Coca-Cola. One man smiled as he taped a playing card, the ace of spades, to the nose of his fighter. Beneath it, a quote scribbled in pencil: 4 more, and I go home. Nakajima exhaled slowly. He didn't even know if Rabaul would last 4 more days. A final entry, scribbled in the margin by a Japanese analyst, likely in disbelief. Estimated Hellcat turnaround time on carrier deck, 27 minutes. 27 minutes to refuel, rearm, relaunch. He looked at the charred remains of a Zero nearby. 3 weeks grounded. No carburetor, no fix. And then, the last line. A quote from an American pilot briefing: "Don't worry about losing it. We'll send another. Focus on the mission." Nakajima dropped the file onto the desk. This wasn't about bravery. It wasn't even about flying skill. It was about velocity, of production, of logistics, of thought. The Americans didn't win because they were fearless. They won because they were prepared to lose, and still win. Tokyo, 1965. The air smelled different now, diesel and concrete, not gunpowder and sweat. The city pulsed with neon and silence, rebuilt on bones. Nakajima stood in the crowd outside Haneda Airfield, a cane in his hand and a program folded under his arm. It was an air show, a gesture of peace. American and Japanese veterans together, beneath the sky they once fought over. And then, the roar. Low and thick, like thunder rolled through an iron pipe. The crowd turned upward as a single plane broke through the haze. Dark blue, shark-nosed, the white star still painted on its wing. A restored Hellcat. Nakajima's breath caught. It banked slowly overhead, smooth and confident, flying not in anger now, but in memory. Children clapped. Old men raised cameras. A woman beside him whispered, "I heard they built thousands of those." Nakajima nodded once. He remembered the first time he saw that silhouette. A flash in the sun. The scream of guns. The twist of smoke behind him. He remembered laughter, his own. A photo, a joke, the certainty of superiority. And then 3 seconds that rewrote the future. After the show, near the fence, he stood beside a tall American in a worn bomber jacket. They exchanged glances. 2 men who once tried to kill each other, now watching the same sky. Nakajima spoke first, his English slow but clear. "You built a machine that ended our world." The American smiled, eyes kind. "No," he said, "we just built enough of them to make you stop believing in yours." As the Hellcat disappeared into the clouds, Nakajima looked down at the tarmac, the same gray shade as Rabaul's broken runways. He whispered to himself, more breath than words. "I laughed at the Hellcat, and never laughed again."